Academy Management's 9th Scholars On Subject Matter Expert Scholar Panel. Thank you to our scholar panelists for their time sharing their expert research-based insights on these critically important topics today. And thank you to everyone for viewing live and via recording at a later time. The Academy of Management, or AOM, is the preeminent professional association for management and organization scholars. Worldwide members are professors and PhD students in business schools at universities, academics in related social science and other fields, and practitioners who value knowledge creation and application. Founded in 1936, AOM features a global community today that is nearly 20,000 strong and spans over 120 countries. Today's panel is titled AOM Scholars On Employee Engagement Best Practices in Today's Workplace. This panel will provide research-based actionable insights on employee engagement, best practices, and tips for advising how organizations and business leaders should foster engagement in a post-COVID workplace environment. For the first time in the AOM Scholars On series, the human resources practitioners from the Society for Human Resource Management, or SHRM, will join AOM scholars for an insightful and practical discussion that will benefit business leaders in a variety of contexts. For attendees, please submit questions throughout the entire panel via the Zoom chat function to be considered answered by our panelists via the Q&A. We will review throughout and answer questions as they are posed if appropriate. And lastly, for media that are viewing live or recorded at a later time, thank you for your time and consideration. You can access all AOM research or interview the panelists by contacting press@aom.org. And that's it. Thank you for your time. And without further ado, I'll kick it over to today's moderator, Leon Prieto of Clayton State University. Go ahead, Leon.
Greetings, everyone. So I'm Leon Prieto, Professor of Management at Clayton State University. I also serve as a research fellow at Cambridge Drudge Business School Center for Social Innovation. So welcome to our AOM Scholars On webinar focused on employee engagement in a post-COVID workplace. So employee engagement is the heartbeat of a thriving organization. So it's not just about checking boxes, it's about relationships to be nurtured. And we must remember that employees are whole people with dreams, aspirations, and ideas that could propel our organizations forward. So with that being said, we have three phenomenal panelists who are equally passionate about helping employees thrive. And I'll give a brief bio of each panelist. So we got Alexander Alonso, who is a Chief Knowledge Officer at SHRM, Society for Human Resource Management. And he leads intelligence, insights, and innovation functions within SHRM. He's recognized for his thought leadership in creating better workplaces. He's an inaugural member of SHRM's Blue Ribbon Commission on Racial Equity in the Workplace, as his research has been featured in numerous media outlets. We also have Ellen Ernst-Kosek, who is the Basil S. Turner Professor at Purdue University's Krannert School of Management, and the first elected president of the Work Family Researchers Network. Ellen is a fellow in several professional bodies. She studies work-life boundaries and diversity employment practices. And she also designs interventions to help organizations implement work-life flexibility and gender equality initiatives. And we also have Johnny Taylor, who is the president and CEO of the Society for Human Resource Management. And with over 20 years of experience as a lawyer and executive, he has served on several advisory boards and corporate boards. He's a weekly contributor to USA Today, a fellow of the National Academy of Human Resources, and a SHRM certified professional. And I'd like to welcome you all to this panel, and it's such an honor to have each and every one of you join us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, this panel is going to be interactive, and I want you all to feel free to riff off each other, if there's a topic that comes up while you all are speaking. So the first question is this, and I will make this open to each one of you. As we all know, the World Health Organization recently declared the pandemic officially over. And this announcement marks a significant shift in our work environments, with remote work and hybrid models becoming the norm. And research indicates that such changes can significantly impact employee engagement and job satisfaction. So what does that mean? What does the end of the pandemic mean for employee engagement and the future of work?
Dr. Kosick?
Go for it.
Wow. Well, I think people are isolated right now from both their workplaces and their even their communities. Companies have called people back in. I did participate last week in a Brookings seminar on flexibility. And what's interesting to me is the variation that is existing and how employers are responding to this. So there's like 10% of the US workforce is still remote. And those companies that are making it work, and the seminar, some companies are going too public on this because it's a strategic advantage. They're recognizing that workers can integrate exercising, going to a tennis group or whatever, but taking their kids to school, but also getting their work done. And then these other companies have kind of pulled back, thinking they're going to get engagement in work by saying you must be in the office. That's not how you get engagement. Engagement is having meaningful relationships when you're there. So if you're pulling people back in and you're not socializing and trying to be clear on what performance matters and still show some of this flexibility that we learned over the pandemic, help people, you could have people just feeling more lonely. They're going to the office, they have more stress now with their kids and family, and they're not having time now to take care of themselves. And later in the seminar, I'll talk about a study I did with workers that included janitors to directors of IT and how supporting engagement and on and off the job, not just at work. We need engagement in our personal life matters for well-being. We are whole people, as we've heard for years. You don't just leave it at the doorstep, even if you're a frontline worker. You need support for your personal life, regardless of your job characteristics. It's not just remote workers. Want to take it away?
Let me jump in a quick follow-up, Ellen. So you're saying a big stick approach wouldn't really work when it comes to getting people back on the job and fully engaged? Okay.
So yeah, no, we have actually, the Brookings, this was a private seminar, and there were some CEOs from 2 other companies, and it's called Chatham Rules. You can't say which companies, but some of them are ramping up remote work because they're seeing they're able to meet well, and they're seeing it as a way to keep talent nationally. And this idea of it, I'll just briefly give the headline of the study I'm writing up for SHRM journal is that what we've learned is if you train leaders to be in a randomized experiment, if you train leaders to be more supportive of personal life, we have 4 behaviors that Dr. Leslie Hammer and I validated over the years. For workers and jobs, you have to look at the job design, right? We all have different jobs. So if you're in a job that has not a lot of schedule control and not a lot of control over boundaries, if you have support people on the job to just feel that they are cared for a little bit more, talking to them, how are you doing today? What do you need off? Emotional exhaustion reduces. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be on all 4 cylinders, but at least brings you up to a performance level. If you're somebody with a lot of flexibility already and you've got support from your leader, you're going to increase your engagement in family life because you feel like, okay, I'm remote working. I can, take a family member to or go to my doctor's appointment this morning. So it's different strokes for different job contexts, but it all leads to some people are starting behind the running line. If you're running a marathon, you got to bring people up to the starting line. If you've got a job with low control, and then some of us already have autonomy built into our jobs. No, we can't, but that's what companies have to realize to meet people where they are. And also that this is a long-term retention strategy, but then you have to invest in your performance management system and look at your work processes and say, how do we redesign work now if we are going to go more flexibly?
Yeah, so I like that, meet people where they are. And let's Alex take this away.
So, Ellen, it's good to see you. And like Ellen, I'm a fellow of SIOP. And one of the things that stands out is the body of research really does speak to the fact that there is some tangible impact in terms of the hybrid work, right? We see, for instance, from our research that 63% of organizations have built in some form of hybrid work. In some industries, much higher, in some industries, much lower. What is clear, though, is it is primarily culture dependent. And the reason I say that is a significant number of organizations are building their cultures in more of an in-office or on-site location approach, and had been and continue to do so. And so you're seeing that they're building that. Now, Ellen referenced specifically one thing that stands out, which is specifically you're talking about people managers and the influence of a people manager. A solid people manager will help carry out that culture, whether it's virtual or in person, and do it really well, which is really allowing people the autonomy, but also understanding specifically how to build in the elements of their personal life. A case in point, we actually launched a recent study called, we call it the State of Workplace here at Sherman. Obviously, we're an economic and polling shop, right? We're not a shop like a university per se. But one of the things that we found was that workers who are hybrid and their culture matches, or say that they have a solid culture, are 10 times as likely to say that they are engaged, that they are experiencing a positive workplace. However, the flip side of that equation is people who are in a hybrid setting or in a fully remote setting are also twice as likely to say that they are going to leave the organization if their manager is not providing a positive situation, right? And so I don't like to play with odds ratios, but that's one thing that stands out to me in particular is we're seeing that it's a little bit of a two-sided coin, right? If you've got a strong culture and good managers, you're much more likely to be able to keep people than if you are someone who doesn't have those elements in place. The last thing I'll say is people managers really do play an important role, and I'd love to turn it over to Johnny to hear what it is that he would bring.
No, you were going to make a third point, Doc. First of all, I'm humbled because I'm here with all of these doctorates and I'm just a little lawyer, right? But an HR guy. But I will tell you, you got all the smart people in, and I'll say whatever I think, which may or may not be smart. But let me say this, and I think it's an observation that everyone listening to this and who will listen to this as it's replayed, it's a grand experiment. None of us know yet. When people are drawing conclusions, and now I'm speaking to all of you researchers, we don't know. 3 years ago, this is not even our world, our reality. And so what we've been doing is, and we're quite fortunate to be able to do longitudinal research now. There was, the day before Friday the 13th, March 13, 2020, and then we're able to see what's happening across a period of time. We don't know about productivity. We don't really know a whole bunch about engagement right now because we've not had enough time. If you think about it, the first 9 to 12 months of it, the significant portion of us who working remotely, when guess what? The world was shut down. You couldn't work remote and go play tennis or go to Starbucks or go to Dunkin' because everything was shut down. So we saw a peak in productivity, and people actually were very happy with their employers then because they were lucky to have a job. Remember, the context was people were laying off, furloughing, et cetera. So people were just so happy that their employer wasn't firing them in the middle of a pandemic. So I think we just all have to be careful not to make any big, aha moments and conclusory statements, because we don't know how this is all going to work out. That's why it's so important that those of us who do this work, and therefore very appropriate, Dr. Prieto, for bringing us together, is we should just be watching this to see how human beings are performing, which types of companies, which types of work milieus will work better than others. We also know, my last point is, some people love working remotely. Some people actually love coming into the office. So this ability to say that everyone will do better and be more engaged with this kind of workplace, that's not accurate or fair either. I know me, I am far more productive personally in office. I'm the guy who when I was in college, the professors could say, you could come to the class or not, it's up to you. I didn't learn if I wasn't sitting in the classroom. My friends could study themselves and not come to class. I needed to be there to engage because my mind wanders off. And the same thing holds true for the current workforce. We don't know enough yet about different individual working styles to draw too many major conclusions. That's my opinion in practice.
And while I still have you, Johnny, you serve on a number of corporate boards,
Mhm.
and I'm wondering, how do you really feel about employee engagement within the C-suite and our top level managers conversing about this? Are they truly passionate about this, or?
Oh, yeah, it's everything right now. I can tell you, and it surprised me sitting in corporate boardrooms. It used to be that employee engagement was a sort of nice to have conversation, but it wasn't that big of a deal. And then we saw unemployment drop sub 4%. And we saw the war for talent and the turnover tsunami and the great resignation and all of that stuff started occurring. And then you saw it not just seeping into the corporate board discussions, but frankly, flooding. We spent more time talking about our people issues and the importance of attracting the right people, retaining those people, and ensuring that they were engaged, because just keeping people who are not engaged doesn't give you a better return on that investment. You could have a whole bunch of people who stay but quit, right? So now everything is about employee engagement. It makes me very happy to sit in a room where business people were normally just talking about the numbers and the market and the competitive environment. And now a significant amount of the conversation is on how do we get our employees engaged? So it's really a positive trend that we've seen in the last 3 to 5 years. Actually, it started, 2018, 19 is when everyone was focused. And it wasn't just compliance. All boards talk about risk, right? And ensuring that you don't get sued. But now it's actually performance related. And we actually need engaged employees to help us thrive in this very competitive market.
And Alexander, are you getting a sense that VPs of HR are part of that conversation as it relates to the strategic imperative for employee engagement?
Well, I'll share this. My sense of this, and just sitting on a couple boards, including the Defense Business Board, what we're seeing specifically is there are a variety of organizations that are thinking about this as a strategic imperative. I'll share with you, more importantly, there are two data points that are purely qualitative, but anecdotal. One, I lead the CEO Academy here within SHRM, which has trained over 630 different CEOs over the last 22 years, a Chatham Rules event, just like what you described, Ellen. And I'll tell you that in numerous occasions, the last 2 years, what we've seen is they added a talent panel. In many cases, they've added a talent panel to talk about the risk of losing talent, but more importantly, about how they engage talent to make sure that they are managing well throughout this process. We've seen specifically that with those talent panels, while they're scheduled for 45 minutes, end up being almost 2 hours long, which tells you the kind of interest that there is, right? You don't get CEOs of the Fords, of DocuSign, of AT&T, and what have you talking about it and spending that much time unless they're really interested in it. The other thing that I'll share with you is, just as an example, is we're seeing that CHROs and chief people officers are being asked to address this as part of their board responsibilities and their management with governance committees, as well as with comp and org committees, or compensation and organizational structure committees. One of the things that is particularly interesting that we've been working on here at SHRM is how do you create a report out that takes this into account, this notion of engagement, health, wellness, and all the different things that we've been talking about. We have a project that we call Project Gershwin, not to be coy. And one of the things that we speak about is specifically this report out that is a metric for CHROs, chief people officers, to report out to their boards. Most intriguing to me, though, and I'd love to see what Johnny thinks about this, is we're seeing that chief people officers are going on the ballot to talk, or agendas, to talk about their risks as well as engagement and talent before CFOs go on to talk about financials, which is just completely the opposite of what it was pre-pandemic. So I'd love to kind of, weigh that in as a factor.
And can I say just one other thing to that point? Yes, and yes. I just went through proxy season on one of the boards. I sit on Fortune 500 board, and I got to tell you, ISS, Glass Lewis, the governance folks, the investor shareholder community, they literally, he's right, the finance, they can figure out the financial part of it, because you report out, you got all of these forms that you've got filings that you must do with the SEC. So they can kind of sort that. What they don't have as much visibility into is engagement, turnover, satisfaction, et cetera. So that has become a huge part of the conversation. I can absolutely tell you that's what's happening. Here's one other sign, and it's a small one, and but it is trending big time. What used to be the board or the committee of a board was referred to historically as the comp committee. We're now seeing the titles change: people and culture, human capital. So they've broadened their remit from just a conversation around compensation of the top 5-10 executives to now the overall people and culture strategy. And that's happening at Fortune 500 companies across the board, is a renaming of that board committee.
Well, that's encouraging to hear. And I'm curious to hear any insights from Ellen based on your own consulting work or research as relates to employee engagement being a strategic imperative.
Yeah, so I want to say years ago, before I was an academic, I was a high potential at a big company. And the comp committee, I worked for the director of comp, and they was just on the salary, and they guys had it laminated in a little form in the back of their wallet. But a couple things I wanted to relate to some comments that others had said. I love Alex's comment about people managers and culture. And I did an article with Sean Pickler on how people see support from their organizations through their manager. It's and specifically support for your job is one thing, but support for personal life is separate and adds value to well-being and reduces work-life conflict. If they see you, they care about my personal life. And I don't think companies always get that. Support could be like, oh, I'll support you to be a workaholic as long as you're producing. And so the leadership development is something that I think. I was talking with a guy who had been a top HR person, former student, a number of companies. He said companies sort of say, yeah, we know we need to do this well-being stuff, but it's sort of like we know we need to clean our basement, but they never want to invest in it. And so now we got to get it beyond talking about it at the C-suite level to them really systematically, training every manager, not just here's how you implement telework, but here's how you help do. I've learned you can do specific behaviors, emotional support, asking people how they're doing that day. You're not talking to your workers. They aren't going to tell you about things beyond their job, except when there's an emergency. Being a role model, if you work for a workaholic, you're not feeling comfortable talking about some things that you need. So be open. A lot of people are kind of secret, like, oh, I'm, working from home today, but I'm really doing some other things. That's fine, right? The other would be instrumental support, helping to implement policies. We have a lot of work-life policies that are underutilized because people are afraid of being not seen as career committed. And the last is what I call kind of creative work-life management. It's win-win. And you see how you can share workers across areas, cross-train. A lot of us are not integrated in our cultures. And there was something else, Johnny, that you had been talking about on the idea of different styles that people have. And I've validated with the Center for Creative Leadership something called flex styles, the work-life styles. And people engage in work and life and how they make these spheres fit differently over the life course and preferences. So Johnny, you're a separator. Sounds like you were, and you need that. So some of us are hybrids, even in ourselves. It's not just work. And others of us are good integrators. What matters is this perception of boundary control, that you can focus on work when you need to and focus on personal life when you need to. And companies manage this and people manage it. And I've got a new review out in Journal of Management that shows that we have done very little on home implementation and these other new worlds that companies have sort of treated off bounds. So the last thing I wanted to mention is there's some legal things that I learned about last week that we need at the US some way to almost have like a corporate cross-state tax approach if we're going to go more, treat us as one market worldwide for employees to give that mobility within the country. Otherwise, you would have to sort of follow the rules of sort of the most toughest cross tax rate of the, like New York might be higher. And if we're really going to use this as a global strategy for our US, we need some policy changes in tax and privacy and non-disclosure rules too. Like if somebody wants to go remote and work somewhere else and they have a non-compete agreement, excuse me, is what I meant, that's a barrier too. So I'll throw it back to Johnny. There's some legal things we could do in the US that would still protect workers' rights. I'm very much concerned about that, but give more flexibility for companies to allow people to work in different ways. What do you think?
Well, two things. One, you're pointing out the elephant in the room is the Fair Labor Standards Act is a 1938 piece of legislation. So it's old. I mean, it's really old, and we have not updated it to reflect, forget a pandemic, a post-pandemic world, even pre-pandemic, it had not kept up. So while it's easy enough for us to say people can work remotely and we want the flexibility, we still have to pay people overtime for all hours worked over 40. We haven't sorted that yet, right? In an environment where how do I account for the time that you're at home, perhaps spending time with your kid, integrating work and life? Should I pay you during that period of time or should I not? How do I account for that? So we have some systemic issues that have to be addressed from a policy standpoint before we can try to truly implement them at scale in the workforce. So you're spot on. The laws have not kept up with the dynamic nature of work. And so lots of work to be done there. I just wanted to point out one other thing, though, that is something that we should all be very, very comfortable about. It's funny when you have these conversations, it focuses on the employee. Like what's good for the employee, what's good for the employee, what's good for the employee. Let me tell you, in board meetings and with CEOs, Dr. Alonso will speak to you about this at CEO Academy. CEOs are kind of fed up with it too, because part of their point is, and what's in this for us? We're investing typically in organizations, either the number one or the number two largest operating spend is on people. We are due a return on that investment. So this isn't totally about the employee. It has to be about the employee and the employer. We need productivity. In an uber competitive, slowing economy, companies need productivity. I would love for you to have this wonderful life, but I want to be in business at the end of this, right? And so we've got to make sure that we strike this balance. Sometimes the conversation, I'm just give you anecdotally, something had happened. An employee said to me, you know, not about a place at work, but about SHRM, but she was talking more generally. She said, it's really frustrating. I want to work remotely. My management team won't allow me to. They're literally unwilling to compromise. This is ridiculous. I'm going to vote with my feet. And I said, I want you to stop and ask yourself, pre-pandemic, you were working in the office Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. That was the standard, right? I said, post-pandemic, you're now in the office 3 days a week and 2 days working remotely. Your management decided to do that. Who's compromising, you or them? The problem is you've not given management any credit for the work that it has done to evolve. When you say compromise, what you really mean is, I want it my way. I want to work fully remotely. And I said, that doesn't sound like a compromise to me. Management that has gone from 5 days a week in the office to 3 has compromised. Are you willing to do the same thing? And if you're not, then this is not a discussion about a compromise. This is about you getting what you want only. And business, frankly, no relationship works that way. It has to be a compromise. It can't be just what you want. And we have to be willing to talk about that with our employees as well. The employer is frankly allowed to determine the terms and conditions of work, always, because they are paying you.
So Johnny, I have a rejoinder for you. I think I want to change the narrative on this.
Okay.
I think I think it's being framed with your friend as an individual accommodation. I want to work at home. And I've worked with, say, Northern Trust wrote up, I have a Harvard Business Review article on flexibility that was picked as top 10 last year. It's being sold in airport bookstores, even in London.
Yep.
And they at Northern Trust, it came out of actually land and costs of working in London and Chicago and other expensive cities, that they decided to look at jobs and say these jobs can be done flexibly.
That's
And
right.
so they then migrated whole groups of jobs where you had to work at home 1 day a week and work in the office 1 day a week, and you could flex in between. And there might be, so it's not this win-lose thing. It's
That's right.
companies have not thought ahead how to be more flexible and how there could be benefits in supporting work life. And legally, we are behind. We are 28th in the world on well-being, and companies are going to pay for this in all of the prescription drugs, turnover, mental health has always been sort of hidden. There's a right to request a flexible schedule in the UK, in Australia, in Canada. We are behind on gender equality, and there's also intersection with many forms of diversity in terms of culture. When you look at lower level jobs in companies, there's often minorities and women, say in our manufacturing during the pandemic, a lot of like the food services. We're also had other people of color and women working these, the people caring for our families. So I think companies are getting those CEO compensation. They need to maybe equal it out a little bit. We have not been passing on increases. So I think those CEOs need to work a little bit in the other shoes. And it's not this win-lose framing.
So I got to jump in here, Alan, because I think that this is sort of turned into a debate, and I'll be brutally honest. I don't agree with you, and I understand the side of the equation in terms of what you're describing, right? But here's what I would argue. I would argue that we're burning the candle at both ends. FLSA needs a revamp. Non-compete agreements, I will say that I don't agree. I do think that there are certain areas where non-compete agreements are absolutely critical. Keep in mind, I serve on a national security board. I serve on a variety of other things where it is part of a defense strategy. It is part of a competitive strategy for the national mission, right? And so I would argue blanket policy against non-compete agreements is a problem. Now, that's just one thing. However, what I would say is we're burning the candle at both ends from an employee perspective from time to time. And I'll say this in large part because we say that, and you raise the issue of specifically what happens when it comes to jobs and looking at what it is that particularly makes a difference for employers when they're taking, you raise the reference of Northern Trust and talking about how they looked at it as financially, it made more sense for them to pull back and not have those jobs in certain properties or certain facilities or the real estate costs associated with work. However, if I go down that efficiency path, I can also make the case that several of those jobs could be automated and they could be actually turned into things that could be done or if made more efficient operationally or optimized. If I was to leverage a variety of different technologies, I'm not even referring to things like generative AI, I'm talking about just plain old automation. Would the employee feel that I am doing as well for them if I was to automate those jobs and then eliminate those jobs? Right? There's a wellness component to it too. That is the notion of what we call around here. And I'm just, the balance has to be struck in some way, right? What I'm talking about is this notion of a comprehensive workforce approach, right? And a comprehensive view at how we get work done, but also how we get wellness done, right? And Johnny is fond of saying that the notion of do good and do good, which is not grammatically correct. Sorry, JT, I stole your line.
No.
But in actuality, it's about doing good and doing good. And in what I refer to it as the 2 W's. It's, am I doing what is wellness and am I doing the work the best way possible, right?
And let me just say one other thing, because I know Doc wants to jump in there, but this notion of lives and livelihoods. We as employers have to do 2 things. I want you to have a wonderful, well life. So yes, as an employer, physically, mentally, emotionally, all of that. But I also, you could have a great life and no job. And so livelihoods matter too. So we've got to strike that balance in ensuring that we take care of both sides, at least 2 sides of the employee. And that is their life, yes, but also their livelihood. Because Doc's right, I can outsource it if that's what I chose to do. And now you don't have a job. You might have all of the peace in the world, but financial stress is a different type of stress when one doesn't have a job.
I love this conversation, though. I got to be honest. I'm enjoying this because it does bring to bear an interesting debate. So
yeah,
well, yeah, debates are welcome here, you know. And And Dr. Alonso, you mentioned AI, and that's a big elephant in the room, especially in the context of policies, right? So, lawmakers, be it in the European Union or in the United States, are grappling with how do we treat with or how do we deal with AI? So, artificial intelligence is transforming the workplace in unprecedented ways. So many employees and some managers view it as a potential threat to job security, while some others view it in a much more positive way. How is SHRM addressing this issue of artificial intelligence in the workplace? Or how should policymakers really address this from your point of view?
So interestingly, this is, I'll share some recent research that we launched that we released just about 4 weeks ago, I want to say, and specifically when it comes to opinions in particular, right? We survey roughly 30,000 working Americans every other week. And one of the things that we identified specifically was that about 10% of the workforce is currently experiencing some form of displacement, some form of displacement related to AI. And AI in general, right? So I'm talking about automation, talking about machine learning, and talking about what is the 4 forms of AI that are the generally accepted forms today. The other thing that we've seen is that about 36% of the working American population says that they view this as a way to optimize or enhance their current work, and that they have a faith, about 33% say, or 32, I should say that they have a faith that their employers are actually going to, before jumping and fully cutting off their jobs or automating their jobs, what they're going to do is actually help make their jobs, make them more efficient in what they do in the workplace, because there is a limitation as to what the AI can do. And we've seen that in a variety of places. From a SHRM perspective, we have actually been sort of leading in terms of the kind of work that we've done. So for instance, 4 years ago, we actually helped the World Economic Forum identify identify human capital experts, human capital practitioners, incumbents to participate in the development of their initial guidance, their initial workplace policy around AI. In addition, we've also participated at the EEOC level, as well as at the different forums, including working with the mayor's office in New York, to talk specifically about what are the considerations that need to happen, and taking into account a broad stakeholder approach, because every pocket that we've seen in a couple different ways is sort of either eliminating the providers or purveyors of artificial intelligence solutions in certain settings or in certain use cases, but then is also not including the worker or the potential applicant. So they're all talking at each other, as opposed to actually getting in a room and figuring things out. And you've got a variety of groups that are arguing about the IP. You got a variety of groups that are arguing about efficiency, and then you've got a variety of groups that are arguing about candidate bill of rights, right? And those types of notions. One of the things that I was at the SIOP conference in Boston last month and witnessed a debate specifically about this, and saw actually an expert from a provider group and an expert from a kind of tracking group almost come to blows. And I said, the one thing that stood out to me is you can't automate or make artificial intelligence when it comes to coming to blows, right? You can't fight. But what was intriguing to me, though, from that debate was I learned specifically that from a generative AI perspective, we're seeing that just in that one example, it was a use case around applications, employment, employee selection. There were 182 different use cases or pilots that were going on across an array of employers. There was about 60 different employers. That's a lot, right? So I think many of us are sort of hoping to slow this and pace it out. And whether we like it or not, we're just not going to be able to pace it out. Some of it is about actually putting our money where our mouth is and actually testing it and using it and engaging it in it. I'll share with you here at SHRM, we're actually engaging in a pilot in 8 different units as an example, where we're testing it in large part because we feel like it can cause efficiencies for our employees, as well as cause efficiencies for the way that we serve our customers. The only thing that we always advocate for is that we make sure that we're engaging in responsible kind of use, right? And where we've seen some cases, I'll share an example. We saw a case recently where there was spurious kind of discussion around what was used for this individual, and it ended up costing them, you know, a lot of reputational kind of capital. And so to me, that's what we argue for, is responsible use.
The other thing that we do here at Sherman, it's really a critical part of it, is we've got to change the narrative. If you go look at the media, every article starts with AI will take your job. Right? No wonder you don't talk about making people, adding stress to people's lives. Imagine coming to work every day saying, this technology is going to make me obsolete, or what I do obsolete. We've got to switch the narrative. And I use this very simple sort of arithmetic that seems to be working with people. The concept is AI plus HI, human intelligence, will equal ROI. So it's artificial intelligence plus human intelligence will equal ROI. It's not one or the other. And that's what we've done, sadly, is we've created this whole narrative that has everyone up in arms and has created the us versus them, technology versus human beings. And I think that is flawed. Now, related to that, and so number one, the narrative, but secondly, we've got to get truly, truly committed to upskilling and reskilling people. And it just reminds me of one of my favorite movies, Hidden Figures, where if you recall in that movie, the women, they were mathematicians, brilliant women, and they were referred to as computers. They were literally called computers in this movie. And then all of a sudden, the machine came about that we know as a computer, and they were threatened immediately, like, oh my gosh, what will we do now with all of these, all of our incredibly bright women? They're mathematicians, but what will they do next? And instead of saying we're going to destroy that machine down the hallway, what we've decided to do is they then learn to program those computers. So we've got to help our employees see a path toward being employed post introduction of AI, generative AI, and the others. If we can do that, people will embrace it. Right now, they are pushing back because it's an existential threat to their livelihood. And I get that. Dr. Kosick, what do you think?
Well, I think you made a very good point too about we look at these sort of as separate initiatives, that the stress and well-being, and then we got AI over here, and it's sort of like, how do you implement technology in this really discontinuity that's disrupting organizations and work in a way that helps well-being as we go through this massive organizational change. And Alex, I'm not discounting the debate back at where we were a few minutes ago. I do think employers have enormous power, much more power than the employee in the employment relationship. And I do think looking at collectively, I don't think this either or. I agree that, there's 5 to 10% of people, I believe, that maybe might not come to work. They need some nudging to say, do your best effort. You do not design the system for the 10% that are like the people that spike the punch at the when you were in high school at the dance, right? You got to say, how do we design a system that builds on trust? And I think flexibility has been viewed as a scapegoat. I'll give you an example. I was reading Axios, and the Silicon Valley bank failure, when I think the CEO or somebody senior was working Hawaii, and they were blaming it on remote workers, like, well, maybe they could have been online engaged. So we have to look at these dual trends of well-being, AI together. And I also, as an academic, and you're all academics in many ways. I have a lot of lawyers in my family too, I have to tell you, Johnny, and they are all integrated. I worry about the ability to learn how to be creative and think of new knowledge. We need new things to go into the big AI database. And I worry about research in some ways and innovation, and teaching people how to be creative and not just say, now we can't even define Google directions, right, when we're on vacation without our phone. So that's where I worry, is how do you do these experiments to build the new knowledge?
Wonderful, wonderful. And as I said, we welcome debates. And talking about debates, a lot of people are talking about we should reframe work-life balance. It should be called work-life integration, work-life blend, and all these different terms, all these different constructs are being developed. So what lessons has the pandemic taught us about employee engagement and this whole concept of work-life balance? And how do you think we can apply these in a positive, non-destructive way?
Well, let me tell you, I just want to jump on that early in probably 2015. I've been talking about not liking the phrase work-life balance because I just don't know what that means, right? At any given time, I could have pretty much no balance in my life because I'm working on a specific project. I got a big paper. Doc is writing all these these scholarly articles in Harvard Business Review, et cetera. Like this idea, and over what period of time? Like, is it balance in the week, balance in the day? Like, I think we went down the wrong path. The spirit of it is you've got to ensure that you take care of the worker and the human being and at once. I get it. I love, and I've been using the term integration for a long time. What happened in 2020 was we were forced. We used to say work is here and your personal life is here. They all came together. We actually took work home. Think about it, because we shut down the physical office space for 50% or so of the US workforce. Keep in mind, we have to always remember about half of the US workforce never had the luxury of working remotely. So we make it sound like everyone went home and worked remotely, but it wasn't true. Now, when you moved those people, you actually moved work into their homes. And now you were forced to integrate, like child keeping, child education. You had to do it all within the four confined walls of some building that wasn't your former workforce. What workplace? What that has done, and you really want to talk about it, is it's created a new dynamic. And I'm going to harken back to something I said in the beginning. We don't yet understand how to make this work. We know that there was some early data, and I know all three of you PhDs here will say this, will be able to support this, but some early data said that people were burning out more because they were working remotely. By virtue of sending this stuff home, there were not your normal signs of shut down your computer, get in your car, decompress and ride home, go pick up your kids, go do this. You just worked. And so people were working extended number of hours at home, and we were burning people out. We saw alcoholism rates go up, divorce rates go up. We saw all of this. So it wasn't work from home and you're gonna have a better life or quality of life. We actually saw some of the opposite. I mean, did you all, that's what I'm understanding from a practitioner standpoint. And then the isolation. We saw people who, people like to interact, generally speaking, not the 10%, Doc, but the people like to interact with other human beings. And when you are an empty nester, or because you're young and you haven't yet had children, or you're old and your children moved on, and you're in this house by yourself all day, 24 hours, and again, nothing else was open, that is really stressful. So I don't think we've got to look at this in context and really learn from it. But you all are the experts. You tell me.
Ellen, did you want to go or?
Sure. So I actually in doing interviews to come up with this work-life assessment, that I've given all over the world. The Singapore government had me over for a dozen years ago because they were worried about people not being burnt out and not having families. Some people you'll interview and you'll say, are you integrator or separate? They're like, or how do you manage boundaries? And like, I don't even like the word boundaries. And there are people that do not like the word integration either. Yeah. They really like this idea of separation. I'm on a National Academy of Science consensus study now on family policies for faculty and STEM, which if you talk about another strategic initiative, that's huge. And one of the problems right now is, and faculty have had this for years, this hybrid working, when people's professional identities overlap tightly with their work identity. And then many employees today are what I would call dual centric. They want to be good parents, or people aren't even starting families, or they have they see them as equal. Yes. We have not figured out with these high talent people that are go, a way to let them feel that they can develop these other non-work identities at an equal plane. And that's where I would like to see the balanced conversation go and not view it as this win-lose proposition. And I think a lot this study I just published in JAP on STEM women basically looked at this idea of boundary control mattering, and that if your company was sympathetic and helped you figure out how you didn't have to have a call when a kid was having a meltdown over school, you're less likely to want to quit that occupation. We saw a lot of people deciding whether to quit or not, depending on, you have to have your camera on, even if it's like this meeting is not at a good time, when you're meeting with your kid's teacher. So it goes back to where we were at the beginning, Alex, throwing it to you, the people leaders and the culture really figuring out how to adapt, support, and different folks need different strokes, but still within this idea of when do you have to be on? Does everybody have to be the same hours, all the time, or what are our core? And then how do we have backup systems? I recommended a buddy system. You have to miss a meeting, you have somebody there to fill you in, that in one of our HBRs. Go ahead, Alex.
Can I just before he
Yeah,
jumps in,
sure.
I got to say something I want to put in context. We forget that 60-70% of the jobs in America are created by small and medium-sized businesses.
Exactly.
And so when we say things like a backup system, send someone else, that assumes that you're in a big organization
Yeah,
that has redundancies.
It doesn't
But
have to be.
But
It
it
really
doesn't,
doesn't.
you don't always, if you're in a shop with 10 employees, one person missing, you don't have anyone to go in that person's stead. So I just I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm saying we have to keep in mind too, sometimes we have our big company bias or big organization university where there are redundancies. A lot of our employers in America simply do not have the luxury of giving employees all of the flexibility that they want. It just doesn't work that way. There's no one else if person A in accounts payable doesn't show up that day. Then people don't get paid.
I agree with you. And actually, a lot of the research shows this SMEs are more flexible. So I'm not saying don't show up, but you have to think about ways to have that accountant participate in some way. We're on the same page.
Yep.
Well,
I'm going to just finish with a thought, if it's okay, Liana. I know we're almost at time.
definitely.
So I'm just going to think specifically about something that we talked about here today, which is actually in reference to Denise Russo and Paul Sackett. And I think we all know who those folks are, right? But specifically what stands out to me is this period, this pandemic period, and everything that we're experiencing is causing us to question two things. One is, what is the psychological contract that we are building with our workforces? And I think about Denise and her work for decades, specifically in that realm. And then I also think about recent work that Paul has been publishing, looking specifically about challenging everything that we believed actually worked is not working the same way. And it's because of that kind of spirit that I think we should take this hand in hand and actually keep going forward.
Okay. Any final words, Ellen?
Just, I hope that if any scholars or academic or companies listening out there, want to keep the conversation going. I think part of this is we have to have partnerships to capture on the ground what's happening and keep learning as we're going.
Good. Johnny, over to yourself.
Yeah, same deal. Just we got to keep learning. We don't know enough yet. I really strongly feel that we don't know enough yet to draw major conclusions about what the world is in this post-pandemic world. It's just too dynamic and we don't have enough time yet.
Yes, so this is an interesting debate, so, at times, this debate, thankfully didn't come to blows like the one in SIOP you just mentioned, Alexander. But one thing we can all agree on is that, we are all equally passionate about, helping organizations thrive, and that includes employers as well. So a lot of times people focus a lot on the employees, but we also have to think of the small and middle-sized firms as well. So it's all about how do we create that culture of care and community within our organizations. So
Great.
Thank you all for coming out and sharing this conversation.
Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to media watching today and in the future. Have a great day, great week, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.